this little commemoration of my childhood, a boy projectionist in the 1920s, or how I learned to sing bass. The year I turned 11, I taught myself to sing the bass line of some traditional church hymns. My vocal range was still adolescent, and I simply listened for the bass line as the organ played and quietly sang the notes an octave high. We're talking about the summer of 1927 in the gallery of a landmark 160-year-old church in Provincetown, Massachusetts at the tip end of Cape Cod. Starting in 1921, my dad was for a decade the 8 weeks summer minister there at that church at the end of the Cape. I had become the proud projectionist on successive Sunday evenings as Dad put on a series of illustrated readings, think Chautauqua, using color glass slides based on photos from Broadway plays and movie films, the illustrated lives of great Americans, and occasionally a scenic travelogue to one of our great national parks in the United States. Those popular programs that my dad put on every Sunday night drew a good audience of summer people and native people as well in the town we were in. And though the movie theater was right across the street from our church, and the Provincetown Players, a famous acting group, were not far away, we still drew a good crowd at the little church on Sunday nights. High up there in the church gallery, I stood ready beside a powerful Bosch and Lomb projector. A king-size bed sheet was our screen. It was hung where it covered up most of a trompe-l'oeil decoration on the front wall of the auditorium. My dad's speaker stand was a podium placed to the left of the screen. Now the program would begin with a brief non-sectarian worship service featuring a few vividly illustrated hymn slides. So everybody didn't need a hymn book, they just sang what was on the screen. Now those hymns could run about 3 verses or even 4, and a boy's interest isn't that long. So to introduce variety, while I was certain I could not be heard above the organ and the singing, I began to fish for notes that would harmonize with the repeated melody of the hymn. The bass pipes of the antique tracker organ in that gallery were close to my position with the projector, and I could easily pick up by ear the bottom line of any familiar hymn. And faithful Mrs. Sal Johnson, the organist who played the morning service of the evening Magic Lantern show, never knew that I was singing bass. Neither did the young fellow who intermittently built up the organ air pressure, pumping a wooden lever shaped like a plow handle. Nobody could hear me. And being thus in the right location at the right time, I learned to sing bass. Dan was a splendid speaker. He'd move the brief song and service along a familiar course. The final item before the main event was a free will offering, and the proceeds of which my dad shared with the church. And as Dad announced the offering, he often had some simple witticism or a joke about Scotchmen to encourage the audience not only to loosen up, but to lighten up. We were in church after all, but not in church in a solemn sense. And we were prepared to be entertained as well as edified by the picture story that was to come. Standing beside the low table, I checked the beginning slide in the projector and made sure that the remaining 60 were positioned for easy handling. The offering concluded, the lights in the whale oil central candelabra would blink out, and the wall-mounted oil lamps along the walls. Tall shutters on the church windows blocked out most of the fading summer evening light, and the faint sound of shuffling tourist feet and slow-moving cars drifted in from Commercial Street outside the church as Dad began. And casually, he raised a hand to the lapel of his coat. And this was my signal to start and also to change the slides as we went on through the program. Behold, some riveting tale for grown-ups began to unfold in the glowing image and spoken word as the world outside grew quietly dark and forgotten. The fast-moving screen images that we moderns now stare at allow us precious little time for immersion, reflection, self-projection into or interaction with what we are seeing on the screen. By contrast, an illustrated reading can become immensely involving, an almost a hypnotic experience. Perhaps it carried us back to childhood's earliest days when we gazed entranced and interacted with a storybook picture as mother or father read the tale to us. Some such a magic spell might have been cast on a Sunday evening during the enchantment we offered summer by summer in a hard-to-imagine now Provincetown of the 1920s and the 1930s. Each illustrated lecture involved some 60 slides and ran about an hour in length. The speaker's story scripts had been written by my dad's elder brother, who was also a minister and an accomplished dramatic reader. The slides were transparency stills of stage plays or movie films, had been drawn from photo archives. Many of them were produced in the New York studios of the Van Alten Company. They'd been painstakingly hand-colored, for the days of color photography were yet to come. My uncle had a large rental library of these storytelling sets, most of them unhappily lost forever. I do still treasure some 16mm home footage of 1920s Provincetown summers. I appear to be about 10 in those movies. Our family and friends are enjoying good times on the beach, or at a Gull Pond nearby on the Cape, or playing on the stranded, disintegrating wreck of a schooner, the Annie Spindler. It was near the lighthouse down there at the beach. There are rare film views of the artist-teacher Charles Hawthorne as he guides a painting class on the beach as we kids sit as models in the hot sun. From time to time in recent years, I've enjoyed presenting one or another of these sets. I'm usually in a church setting. A great favorite, of course, is Dickens' Christmas Carol, with a splendid series of images created by many artists. The reader's script is based on Dickens' own text as he condensed it for lecture hall performance. It never fails to work its magic as poor Bob Cratchit, and old Scrooge, and Tiny Tim, and the rest spring to life among us in imagination, and we interact with them, their concerns, and their hopes and sorrows and joys, and these serve to illuminate our own. Some such uplifting effect may have been felt during those summer slide shows long ago, and indeed those particular films and plays had been selected for these sorts of readings precisely because of the insights and challenges and reassurance and high ideals of their message. You need not think that I was merely a detached sorcerer's apprentice as I played my role in those Sunday night events. Sure, I was behind the scenes and helping to put on a show. Sure, I was involved with the mechanics, scorched fingers and all. Sure, I was to get from Mr. Payne a quarter for my evening's work, and that amount would nearly pay for a soda at the drugstore and entry to an afternoon show at the theater movie. But nevertheless, in spite of that naively, worldly wise attitude of a kid, some infusion of those pictured dramas did quietly shape a young imagination, implanting and fostering a few simple values and ideals, exemplars and cautions. Not a bad start when you're growing up in the roaring 20s in our country. That thrilling era of wonderful nonsense, it's been called, and prohibition and gangsterism and free love and flappers. Not so bad to be exposed to these stories when you're heading for high school and college amid the Great Depression, FDR and his exciting New Deal, and off in the dim unknown lie career and marriage and babies and the trying years of World War II. Not a bad start for a kid. So, that's how and where and when I learned something about singing bass and something about living life. I remain grateful for these magic lantern memories and still will be grateful always.